and the summer of 1985 belonged to the children. In the small town of Hollow Ridge, Pennsylvania, where the Appalachian foothills roll like green waves against a pale sky, summer meant freedom. It meant bare feet on hot pavement, the metallic taste of garden hose water, and the promise of soft-serve ice cream from Betty's stand, once a tiny white shack that sat at the corner of Maple Street and Old Route 9. Betty's stand had been there for 30 years, owned and operated by Betty Thornton, when a woman in her late 60s with silver hair she wore in a tight bun and hands that could scoop perfect spirals of vanilla in her sleep. The stand opened every year on Memorial Day and closed after Labor Day. It was a ritual, a promise, a cornerstone of childhood in Hollow Ridge. On the afternoon of July 23, 1985, a Tuesday, the temperature climbed to 94 degrees. The heat pressed down on the town like a heavy hand, making the air shimmer above the asphalt. Children flocked to Betty's stand in waves, clutching sweaty dollar bills and quarters, their voices rising in a chorus of orders. Chocolate dip, rainbow sprinkles, cherry twist. Among them was 11-year-old Emma Leigh Hartman. Emma was the kind of child people noticed, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she had a quality that seemed almost out of place in someone so young. She was thoughtful, quiet, the type of girl who would stop to help a younger kid tie their shoe, who would ask her mother if the stray cat in their backyard looked hungry. Her teachers adored her. Her classmates sought her out at recess. Her parents, Robert and Linda Hartman, considered themselves the luckiest people alive. Emma had light brown hair that fell just past her shoulders, usually pulled back with a simple fabric headband. She had freckles across her nose and cheeks, and brown eyes that seemed too old for her face, as if she understood things she should not have to understand yet. She wore a yellow cotton dress that day, the kind with small white flowers embroidered along the hem. Her mother had made it for her birthday in April. Emma left her house at 3:47 in the afternoon. Her mother noted the time because she had just finished watching her soap opera, and the clock on the living room wall had ticked past the 3/4-hour mark. Emma asked if she could ride her bike to Betty's stand. She had $2 folded neatly in the pocket of her dress. She wanted a vanilla cone with chocolate sprinkles. Linda Hartman said yes. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Betty's stand was 6 blocks from the Hartman house. 6 blocks. Like a straight shot down Maple Street, past the Johnson's house with the blue shutters, past the empty lot where kids played kickball, past the Methodist church with the white steeple. Emma had made the trip dozens of times before. Everyone in Hollow Ridge knew everyone else. It was safe. It was always safe. Emma arrived at Betty's stand at approximately 4:02 p.m. Multiple witnesses saw her. Mrs. Patricia Yates, who lived across the street from the stand, was watering her petunias and saw Emma prop her bike against the side of the building. Tommy and Derek Mills, 2 brothers aged 9 and 7, were sitting on the curb eating popsicles and remembered seeing Emma get in line. Even Betty Thornton herself recalled the moment Emma stepped up to the window, that sweet smile on her face, asking politely for vanilla with chocolate sprinkles. Betty handed Emma her cone at 4:06 p.m. Emma paid with exact change, $2, and Betty remembered thinking how rare it was for a child to have exact change ready. Emma thanked her, turned away from the window, walked toward her bike. And then she was gone. Not immediately, not in some dramatic, cinematic flash. The truth of what happened to Emma Leigh Hartman is far more insidious because it unfolded in the gaps between moments, in the spaces where no one was looking closely enough. Mrs. Yates went inside to answer her phone. The Mills brothers finished their popsicles and ran home. Betty served 3 more customers, one after another, a steady rush that kept her hands moving and her attention divided. When the line finally cleared, Betty glanced at the clock. It was 4:19 p.m. She noticed Emma's bike was still leaning against the side of the stand. Odd, she thought, but not alarming. And not yet. But maybe Emma had walked over to the small park across the street, the one with 2 rusty swings and a slide that burned your legs in the summer heat. Maybe she had seen a friend. Betty went back to wiping down the counter, restocking napkins, preparing for the next wave of customers. At 5:30 p.m., Robert Hartman pulled into his driveway after work. He was a machinist at the mill outside town, a job that left his hands permanently stained with oil and his back aching by the end of each shift. He walked into the house expecting to find Emma at the kitchen table, doing her summer homework or reading one of those library books she loved so much. Linda was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. She looked up when Robert entered, smiled, asked him how his day was. Normal. Everything was normal. "Where's Emma?" Robert asked. "At Betty's," Linda replied. "She left around 4:45. Robert glanced at the clock above the stove. It was 5:34 p.m. He felt the first prickle of unease, that parental instinct that something was slightly off, like a picture frame hanging crooked on a wall. Emma should have been home by now. She always came home before dinner. Linda set down her spoon. The unease spread between them like smoke. Robert got back in his car and drove to Betty's stand. It took him less than 3 minutes. When he pulled up, he saw Emma's bike immediately, still propped against the side of the building. His heart began to pound. He got out of the car and walked to the window. Betty was serving a young couple with a toddler. When she saw Robert's face, something in her expression shifted. She knew before he even asked. "Have you seen Emma?" Robert said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Betty's mouth opened. Closed. She looked at the bike, looked back at Robert. She started. "She was here. Hours ago. Around 4. She got her cone and I thought she left, but her bike." Robert did not wait for her to finish. He started calling Emma's name, loud, desperate. He walked across the street to the small park. He checked behind the stand, around the corners, in the narrow alley between Betty's and the hardware store next door. Nothing. Nothing. Other people started to notice. Mrs. Yates came outside. The couple with the toddler stepped away from the window. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed. Everyone started calling Emma's name, voices overlapping, rising in pitch, tinged with the kind of panic that spreads like wildfire in a small town. By 6:15 p.m., the Hollow Ridge Police Department received the call. By 6:45 p.m., officers were canvassing the area. By 7:30 p.m., the sun was beginning to set, and Emma Leigh Hartman had been missing for over 3 hours. The investigation began with the same assumptions that guide most missing child cases. Emma had wandered off. She had gotten lost. She was playing somewhere and lost track of time. Children do this. It happens. But as the hours stretched into evening, and evening bled into night, those assumptions began to crumble. Hollow Ridge was not a big town. It had a population of just under 4,000 people. Everyone knew everyone else's business. The police chief, a man named Douglas Merrick, who had held the position for 18 years, organized search parties immediately. Volunteers spread out in all directions from Betty's stand, combing through yards, checking sheds, calling Emma's name until their voices went hoarse. Linda and Robert Hartman stood outside Betty's stand, clinging to each other, their faces pale and drawn. Linda kept saying the same thing over and over, like a prayer or a curse. "I told her she could go. I told her she could go." The first 24 hours are critical in a missing child case. Everyone knows this. The police know this. And the community knows this. The clock was ticking, and with every passing hour, the likelihood of a happy ending diminished. Officers interviewed everyone who had been at Betty's stand that afternoon. Mrs. Yates. The Mills brothers. Betty Thornton herself, who sat in the back of a police cruiser with tears streaming down her face, telling the same story again and again. Emma ordered her cone. Emma paid. Emma walked away. I swear I thought she left. I swear. But no one had seen Emma leave. No one had seen her get on her bike and ride away. She had simply walked out of view, cone in hand, and vanished. The police expanded their search radius. They checked the woods behind the elementary school. They searched the creek that ran along the edge of town, the one where kids liked to catch tadpoles and skip stones. They went door to door, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. A strange car, an unfamiliar face, anything. Nothing. Nothing. On the second day, the state police arrived. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors thumping against the summer sky. The media descended on Hollow Ridge like locusts, news vans with satellite dishes lining the streets, the reporters shoving microphones into the faces of grieving parents and terrified neighbors. Emma's face was everywhere, printed on flyers that were stapled to telephone poles, taped to store windows, handed out at grocery stores and gas stations. Missing. 11 years old. Last seen wearing a yellow dress with white flowers. If you have any information, please call the Hollow Ridge Police Department. Tips poured in. Hundreds of them. Someone claimed to have seen a girl matching Emma's description at a rest stop 30 miles away. Someone else reported seeing a suspicious man in a blue sedan near Betty's stand earlier that day. Every lead was followed. Every tip was investigated. All of them led nowhere. Nowhere. Investigators began to piece together a timeline, trying to fill in the gaps. Emma had been at the stand at 4:06 p.m. Multiple witnesses confirmed this. The next confirmed sighting, the last confirmed sighting, was at approximately 4:08 p.m. when a teenager named Jessie Dalton saw Emma walking past the hardware store while still holding her ice cream cone. Jessie had been sitting on the steps of the store, waiting for her father to finish buying paint. She remembered Emma because of the yellow dress. She remembered thinking it looked homemade. She remembered Emma's ice cream was starting to drip down the cone, and Emma was licking it quickly, trying to keep up. Where was Emma going? The police asked Jessie. Did she seem scared? Was anyone following her? Jessie shook her head. She was just walking. Normal. Like any kid with an ice cream cone on a hot day. I looked away for maybe a minute, and when I looked back, she was gone. 1 minute. 60 seconds. And that was the window. That was when Emma Leigh Hartman disappeared. The investigation shifted. Police began to consider the possibility that Emma had been abducted. The word hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, unspoken but understood by everyone. Someone had taken her. Someone had seen an 11-year-old girl walking alone with an ice cream cone and had made a decision that would destroy countless lives. But who? But who? Hollow Ridge was not the kind of place where strangers went unnoticed. But it was not a town where someone could drive in, snatch a child, and disappear without anyone seeing something. And yet, that seemed to be exactly what had happened. Detectives compiled a list of every registered sex offender within a 50-mile radius. They interviewed each one, checked alibis, searched properties. Nothing. They looked into local men with criminal records, anyone with a history of violence or inappropriate behavior around children. Nothing. Nothing. Suspicion, as it often does, began to turn inward. The community started to fracture. Neighbors looked at each other with new eyes, wondering, questioning. Could it be him? Could it be her? Paranoia festered like an open wound. Robert Hartman, Emma's father, fell under scrutiny. It is an ugly truth of these investigations, but statistically family members are often involved. The police questioned him repeatedly. Where were you on the afternoon of July 23rd? At work. Can anyone verify that? Yes, a dozen people. They checked his story. It held. Robert Hartman had been at the mill until 5:15 p.m. He could not have been involved. Linda Hartman was also questioned. Mothers, too, are not exempt from suspicion. But Linda's grief was so raw, so all-consuming, that even the most hardened detectives could not believe she had anything to do with her daughter's disappearance. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She spent her days sitting in Emma's room, holding her daughter's stuffed rabbit, staring at nothing. Weeks turned into months. The media coverage dwindled, and the search parties grew smaller. Life in Hollow Ridge tried, haltingly, to return to normal, though nothing would ever truly be normal again. Betty Thornton closed her stand at the end of August, 2 weeks earlier than usual. She could not bear to be there anymore, could not stand the way people looked at her. the unspoken accusation in their eyes. Why didn't you watch her? Why didn't you make sure she was safe? Betty would never reopen the stand. She sold the property the following spring and moved to Ohio to live with her sister. The police continued to investigate, but leads dried up. Tips stopped coming in. Emma's case went cold, but the Hartmans never stopped looking. Robert printed thousands more flyers. Linda called the police department every week, asking if there was any news, any updates, anything at all. They appeared on talk shows, made desperate pleas to the camera, begging whoever had taken their daughter to bring her home. "Please," Linda whispered into the microphone, tears streaming down her face. "Please just let her go. We won't press charges. We just want her back. Please." But Emma did not come back. Years passed. 5 years. 10 years. 15. The town of Hollow Ridge carried the weight of Emma's disappearance like a scar that never fully healed. Parents held their children a little tighter. The carefree innocence of summer afternoons was tainted, poisoned by the knowledge that something terrible could happen in the space of 60 seconds. Robert and Linda Hartman aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. Their hair turned gray. Their faces became lined and hollow. And they stayed in Hollow Ridge, in the same house where Emma had grown up, because leaving felt like abandoning her. Emma's room remained untouched. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her books still sat on the shelf, bookmarks tucked between pages she would never finish reading. In 2005, on the 20th anniversary of Emma's disappearance, the local newspaper ran a feature story. "Where is Emma Hartman?" The article rehashed the details of the case, interviewed the now retired Chief Merrick, included a photo of Linda and Robert standing in Emma's room, looking like ghosts themselves. But there were no new leads, no breakthroughs, just the same unanswered questions that had haunted Hollow Ridge for 2 decades. And then, in the spring of 2024, 39 years after Emma vanished, something changed. The FBI had been quietly working on a project for several years, a massive undertaking to digitize and cross-reference cold case files from across the country. Advances in technology, DNA analysis, and forensic techniques meant that cases once thought unsolvable could be reopened with new tools, new perspectives. A young analyst named Monica Reeves, working out of the FBI's Pittsburgh field office, was assigned to review cold cases from western Pennsylvania. She was 28 years old, methodical and detail-oriented, the kind of person who could spend hours poring over documents without losing focus. She had grown up hearing about Emma Hartman. Every kid in Pennsylvania had. The girl who vanished from the ice cream stand. Monica pulled Emma's file in February 2024. It was thick, stuffed with reports, witness statements, photographs, maps. She began reading, taking notes, looking for anything that might have been missed. And then, on page 263, she found it. It was a single witness statement, buried in the middle of the file, from a man named Gus Pellman. Gus had been 71 years old in 1985, a widower who lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Hollow Ridge. He had called the police 3 days after Emma disappeared, saying he had seen something that might be important. On the afternoon of July 23rd, Gus had been driving home from the grocery store. He took Old Route 9, the road that ran past Betty's stand. As he drove past, around 4:10 p.m., he saw a white panel van parked on the shoulder, just beyond the stand, near the edge of the woods. The van's side door was open. Gus did not think much of it at the time, but after hearing about Emma, he wondered if it might be connected. The police had followed up on Gus's tip. They had searched for the van, asked around, but no one else had seen it. The lead went nowhere. Gus's statement was filed away and forgotten. But Monica Reeves did not forget. She kept reading, cross-referenced the statement with others. And then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 4 months after Emma disappeared, in November 1985, another girl went missing. This time in a town called Willow Creek, about 80 miles north of Hollow Ridge. The girl's name was Katie Ann Marsh. She was 10 years old. She was last seen walking home from school. No witnesses, no leads. Her case also went cold. Monica pulled Katie's file. She read through it page by page, looking for connections. And there, in the witness statements, she found another mention of a white panel van. A neighbor had seen it parked near the elementary school the day Katie disappeared. Monica's heart began to race. She started searching for other cases, other missing girls, other mentions of white panel vans. She found 6 more. Between 1984 and 1989, 8 girls between the ages of 9 and 12 vanished from small towns across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. All of them disappeared in the late afternoon or early evening. All of them were last seen in public places. And in 5 of the 8 cases, witnesses had reported seeing a white panel van in the area around the time of the disappearance. None of the cases had been connected before. Different jurisdictions, different investigators, no centralized database to cross-reference information. Each case had been worked in isolation, the connections invisible. But Monica Reeves saw them. She saw the pattern. She compiled her findings into a report and presented it to her supervisors. Within days, a task force was formed. The cases were officially linked. But a serial predator, active in the mid to late 80s, had been operating across state lines, abducting young girls and vanishing without a trace. The question now was, who? And more importantly, were the girls still alive? The investigation exploded back to life. The FBI agents descended on Hollow Ridge, on Willow Creek, on every town where a girl had disappeared. They re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined evidence, used modern forensic techniques to test samples that had been collected decades earlier. In April 2024, investigators got their first major break. A forensic genealogist, using DNA from a single hair found in Katie Marsh's school locker, built a family tree. The hair did not match Katie, it belonged to someone else. Someone who had been in contact with her shortly before she vanished. The genealogist worked backward, tracing bloodlines, building connections. It took 6 weeks, and then, finally, a name emerged. Leonard Ray Pritchard. Leonard Ray Pritchard. Leonard Pritchard had been 42 years old in 1985. He worked as a traveling appliance repairman, moving from town to town, fixing refrigerators and washing machines. He drove a white panel van with his company's logo on the side. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. He was, by all accounts, unremarkable, invisible. Visible. He had died in 2003, at the age of 60, from a heart attack. He was buried in a small cemetery outside of Columbus, Ohio. But Leonard Pritchard had owned property. A cabin tucked deep in the woods of West Virginia, miles from the nearest town. He had purchased it in 1982, paid in cash, and rarely spoke about it to anyone. After his death, the property had passed to his estranged brother, who had never visited it, never even thought about it. On May 14, 2024, FBI agents obtained a warrant and drove to the cabin. What they found there would change everything. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that had not seen maintenance in decades. Pine trees pressed in from all sides, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even at midday, the forest floor remained dim. The air smelled of wet earth and decay, that particular odor of places long abandoned by human presence. As the convoy of FBI vehicles crept along the rutted path, their tires crunching over fallen branches and pockets of mud, the Special Agent Marcus Dollywood felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He had been working violent crimes for 17 years. He had seen things that kept him awake at night, things he would never speak about to his wife or children. But this felt different, heavier, because 39 years was a long time, long enough for hope to calcify into something else entirely, long enough that whatever they found in Leonard Pritchard's cabin would either bring closure or confirm the worst nightmares of 8 families who had spent decades in limbo. The cabin came into view just past noon. It was small, maybe 600 square feet, built from rough-hewn logs that had gone gray with age and weather. The roof sagged in the middle. Several windows were broken, covered haphazardly with plywood that had warped and split. Vines crawled up the sides of the structure, nature slowly reclaiming what had been taken from it. The agents parked their vehicles in a rough semicircle and stepped out into the stillness. No bird song, no rustling of animals in the underbrush, just silence, thick and oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Dalewood pulled on latex gloves and approached the front door. It hung crooked on rusty hinges, the wood around the lock splintered and rotting. He did not need to use force. A simple push, and the door swung inward with a groan that echoed through the trees. The smell hit him immediately. Not the reek of decomposition, that would have dissipated years ago, but something else. Mildew, rust, the sour tang of old urine, and underneath it all, something indefinable, something that made every instinct in his body scream that terrible things had happened here. And the interior was dark. Dalewood clicked on his flashlight, and the beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a single room. A wooden table sat in the center, its surface scarred and stained. A kerosene lantern, covered in dust, sat unlit in one corner. The cot with a bare, filthy mattress occupied another corner. And along the far wall, there was a door. Dalewood's light fixed on it. The door was newer than the rest of the cabin, made from solid wood, reinforced with metal brackets. A heavy padlock hung from the hasp, rusted but still intact. No one spoke. The team moved in formation, methodical, documenting everything with cameras before touching anything. The forensic technicians began collecting samples, dusting for prints, though after 21 years and the elements, the likelihood of finding usable evidence was slim. Dalewood walked to the reinforced door. He examined the padlock, then looked back at his team. "Bolt cutters," he said quietly. It took 2 tries. The lock was old, corroded but stubborn. When it finally gave way with a metallic snap, the sound seemed to reverberate through the cabin like a gunshot. Dalewood pulled the lock free and set it aside. He placed his hand on the door handle, hesitated for just a moment, and then pulled. The door opened onto a set of stairs leading down into darkness. It's a basement, or more accurately a root cellar, the kind old cabins often had for storing vegetables and preserves through the winter. But as Dalewood descended the steps, his flashlight beam sweeping across the space below, it became immediately clear that Leonard Pritchard had not used this space for storing food. The cellar was larger than expected, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with a ceiling just tall enough for a man to stand upright. The walls were bare earth, held back by rough timbers. The floor was packed dirt, and scattered across that floor, illuminated in stark relief by Dalewood's flashlight, were objects that told a story more horrifying than any verbal testimony could convey. Shoes. Small shoes. Mary Jane's and sneakers and sandals, 8 pairs in total, each one tiny and worn. The clothing. Dresses, shorts, shirts, all children's sizes, folded in a neat pile in the corner. A stuffed animal. A grey rabbit with one button eye missing. Dalewood's throat tightened. He recognized that rabbit. He had seen it in photographs, clutched in the arms of an 11-year-old girl with freckles and a homemade yellow dress. Emma. Ben. Alma. Behind him, one of the forensic technicians descended the stairs and stopped abruptly. "Oh God," the tech whispered. Dalewood forced himself to keep moving, to keep documenting, even as his hands began to shake. Along one wall, someone had carved marks into the timber, 8 vertical lines, each one representing something Dalewood did not want to contemplate. Beside the marks, scratched into the wood in a child's unsteady hand, were initials. EHKMJT, others harder to read, worn smooth by time. And the girls had been here, all of them. This cellar, this tomb, had been their prison. But there were no bodies. Dalewood swept his light across every inch of the space, looking for graves, for disturbed earth, for any indication of where Leonard Pritchard had disposed of his victims. Nothing. The floor was hard-packed, undisturbed for years. If bodies had been buried here, it was not in this cellar. The team spent hours processing the scene. Every item was photographed, catalogued, carefully removed and bagged as evidence. And the shoes were sent for DNA analysis. But the clothing was examined for fibers, hair, skin cells, anything that could be matched to the missing girls. The rabbit was handled with special care, placed in a sealed evidence bag for transport back to the lab. As the sun began to set and long shadows stretched across the forest floor, Dollywood stood outside the cabin and made the call he had been dreading. He contacted the task force coordinator back at the Pittsburgh field office and delivered his preliminary report. We found the location. Confirmed evidence linking at least 3 of the victims to this site. No remains recovered at this time. Continuing search of the surrounding area. The coordinator's voice was steady, professional. "What is your assessment, Agent Dollywood?" Dollywood looked back at the cabin, at the dark doorway that led down into that cellar. He thought about 8 little girls who had been brought to this place, who had descended those stairs, who had realized in whatever capacity children can realize such things, that they were never going home. This was his killing ground, Dollywood said quietly. He kept them here. I do not know for how long. But this is where it happened. The following day, search teams returned to the property with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and excavation equipment. If Leonard Pritchard had buried the girls somewhere on his property, they would find them. The search expanded outward from the cabin in concentric circles. The dogs worked methodically, their handlers guiding them through the dense forest, watching for any change in behavior that might indicate the presence of human remains. The radar operators moved slowly, carefully scanning the earth for anomalies. On the 3rd day, one of the dogs alerted near a clearing about 200 yards from the cabin. The handler called it in immediately. The dog sat, perfectly still, staring at a patch of ground that looked no different from the surrounding forest floor. But the dog knew. Dogs always know. Excavation began within the hour. The team worked slowly, carefully using hand tools once they got within 2 feet of the surface. The soil was dense, packed with roots and stones. It took time. And then, at a depth of approximately 4 feet, one of the technicians stopped. Bone. Says bone. Small, fragile, unmistakably human. The excavation slowed to a painstaking crawl. Every inch of soil was sifted, every fragment of bone carefully exposed and documented. It took 2 full days to complete the exhumation of the first grave. What they found was the skeleton of a child, a girl, aged approximately 10 to 12 years. The bones were incomplete, damaged by time and the acidity of the soil, but enough remained for analysis. A forensic anthropologist examined the remains on site and estimated the time since death at approximately 35 to 40 years, that consistent with the timeline of the disappearances. Near the skeleton, they found a small metal barrette, the kind used to hold back a child's hair. It was corroded but still recognizable, and engraved on the back in tiny letters were the initials K.M. Katie Ann Marsh. The search continued. Over the next week they found 6 more graves, all within a 200-yard radius of the cabin, all shallow, all containing the remains of children. 7 of the 8 missing girls were accounted for, identified through dental records, DNA and personal items buried with them. But Emma Leigh Hartman was not among them. The forensic team triple-checked. They expanded the search area, brought in additional dogs, scanned every inch of Leonard Pritchard's property. But there was no 8th grave. No remains matching Emma's description. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. 7 victims confirmed dead, their families finally, horrifically, receiving the answers they had waited decades to hear. But one girl, the first girl, the one whose face had become synonymous with this case, remained missing. Where was Emma? On June 3, 2024, the FBI held a press conference. Special Agent in Charge Victoria Lang stood behind a podium, flanked by other agents and representatives from the Pennsylvania State Police. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones. The energy was electric, chaotic. Agent Lang delivered the news in measured tones. 7 victims identified. Leonard Pritchard confirmed as the perpetrator. The investigation ongoing. Families notified. And then the question everyone wanted answered. What about Emma Hartman? Agent Lang paused. Her expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. We have not recovered remains matching Emma Hartman at this time. The search is continuing. We are exploring multiple avenues of investigation. The press erupted. Questions overlapped, voices rising in a cacophony. Is Emma still alive? Was she taken somewhere else? Why was she not buried with the others? What makes her case different? Agent Lang raised a hand for silence. At this time, we cannot definitively state what happened to Emma Hartman. We are treating her case as an active missing persons investigation until we have evidence to the contrary. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in that room. There was a chance, however slim, that Emma had survived, and that she had been taken somewhere else, and that she was, even now, somewhere out in the world alive. Or perhaps the alternative was even more disturbing. Perhaps Leonard Pritchard had done something different with Emma, something that set her apart from the others. But the Hartman family was notified privately before the press conference. Linda Hartman, now 73 years old, sat in her living room with Robert beside her, holding his hand as two FBI agents delivered the news. 7 girls found. Emma not among them. Linda's reaction was not what the agents expected. She did not cry. She did not collapse. Instead, she looked at them with eyes that had seen too much grief to process anymore, and she asked a single question. Do you think she is alive? The agents exchanged glances. We do not know, Mrs. Hartman. But we are going to find out. The investigation shifted focus. If Emma was not buried with the others, then what had happened to her? Investigators began to construct a detailed profile of Leonard Pritchard, looking for patterns, for deviations, for anything that might explain why Emma's fate had been different. They spoke to people who had known Pritchard, former co-workers, neighbors, his estranged brother. Most described him as quiet, unremarkable, forgettable. But he kept to himself. He was polite but distant, but no one suspected anything. But then they found someone who remembered something unusual. A woman named Greta Simmons, who had worked as a dispatcher for the appliance repair company that employed Pritchard in the mid-80s, recalled a strange phone call. It was sometime in late July or early August of 1985. She could not remember the exact date, but Pritchard had called in to request an extended leave of absence. He said it was a family emergency, that he needed to travel out of state for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Greta remembered being surprised because Pritchard had never taken time off before, had never mentioned having family. But she approved the request. He left. And when he came back, almost 3 weeks later, he seemed different. Quieter, if that was even possible. More withdrawn. Maibin. Where did he go? The agents asked Greta. She shook her head. He never said. I did not ask. It was not really my business. But the timing was significant. Emma disappeared on July 23, 1985. If Pritchard had left town shortly after, taken an extended trip somewhere, perhaps he had taken Emma with him. The agents pulled Pritchard's financial records, what little existed. He had been a cash-based individual, avoided credit cards and banks whenever possible. But they did find one thing. A receipt, dated August 8, 1985, from a motel in a town called Ridgemont, Virginia, about 300 miles south of Hollow Ridge. It was not much, but it was something. A team was dispatched to Ridgemont. The motel, the Blue Star Inn, was still in operation, though under different ownership. The current manager allowed agents to review old records, handwritten ledgers from 1985 that had been stored in a back office for decades. And there, on page 47 of the August 1985 ledger, was Leonard Pritchard's name. Checked in on August 6th, checked out on August 11th. Room 14. The agents requested to see the room. It had been renovated multiple times over the years, but the structure was the same. They searched it anyway, looking for anything, any trace that Emma might have been there. They found nothing. But then, one of the agents spoke to a woman who had been working as a housekeeper at the motel in 1985. Her name was Dorothy Price, now in her late 70s, still living in Ridgemont. Dorothy remembered Leonard Pritchard, not because he was memorable, but because of something odd. He had requested that his room not be cleaned during his stay, had hung the Do Not Disturb sign on his door for 5 consecutive days. When he finally checked out and Dorothy went in to clean, she found the room in strange condition. The bed had been slept in, but only on one side. The other side was untouched. There were empty food wrappers, fast food bags, scattered across the table. But what Dorothy remembered most vividly was finding a small yellow hair ribbon wedged between the bed and the nightstand. She had picked it up, thinking it was trash, and thrown it away. It was not until years later, after Pritchard's arrest and the news coverage, that she realized what she might have found. But by then it was too late. The ribbon was long gone, lost in a landfill decades prior. The agents thanked Dorothy and returned to their investigation. The ribbon was not proof of anything, not without physical evidence, but it was one more piece of a puzzle that was slowly, agonizingly coming together. Leonard Pritchard had taken Emma to Virginia. He had kept her alive, at least for those 5 days. But then what? The team expanded their search, looking at Pritchard's movements after he left Ridgemont. They found another receipt, this one from a gas station in eastern Tennessee, dated August 12th, and another from a diner in Kentucky, August 13th. Pritchard had been traveling, moving, taking Emma farther and farther from home. And then the trail went cold. No more receipts, no more sightings, nothing. Until an agent reviewing Pritchard's property records made a discovery. In addition to the cabin in West Virginia, Pritchard had owned a second property, a small house in rural Georgia, purchased in 1987, 2 years after Emma's disappearance. The property had been sold in 1995, after Pritchard moved to Ohio. The address was flagged. A team was sent to Georgia. The house was still standing, occupied now by a retired couple who had bought it from Pritchard's estate. They knew nothing about the previous owner, had no idea of the horrors connected to him. The agents explained the situation and requested permission to search the property. The couple agreed immediately, horrified by the revelation. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, sitting on 3 acres of land. The agents searched methodically room by room. Nothing. The house had been renovated, painted, updated. Any trace of Pritchard's presence had been erased. But then, one of the agents went into the backyard and noticed something. A stone marker, small and weathered, half hidden by overgrown grass near the edge of the property. It looked like a garden stone, the decorative kind people use to mark flower beds. But when the agent cleared away the grass, he saw something that made his breath catch. Carved into the stone, faint but still visible, was a single word. Angel. Wengel. The agent called for backup. Within hours, ground-penetrating radar was being used to scan the area around the stone, and the radar showed an anomaly. A disturbance in the soil roughly 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, buried approximately 5 feet down. Excavation began at dawn the next morning. The soil in Georgia was different from West Virginia, red clay that packed hard and resisted the shovels. It took hours, but finally at a depth of 4.5 feet they found it. And a wooden box, handmade, simple, and inside, wrapped carefully in a faded yellow blanket, were the remains of a child. The forensic team worked quickly. Dental records were compared. DNA samples were processed. And on July 18, 2024, exactly 39 years and 5 days after she vanished from Betty's stand, Emma Leigh Hartman was officially identified. She had been found. Then the news broke like thunder. Every major outlet picked up the story. Emma Hartman found. FBI closes decades-old case. The girl from the ice cream stand, finally home. Linda and Robert Hartman were notified in person. Linda wept. Robert, who had remained stoic through decades of searching, finally broke. They held each other in their living room, the same room where they had waited for 39 years, and grieved for the daughter they had lost so long ago. But even in their grief there were questions. Why had Emma been treated differently? Why had she been taken to Georgia, buried with care, marked with a stone, when the others had been discarded in shallow graves near the cabin? The FBI behavioral analysts offered theories. Perhaps Emma had been Pritchard's first victim, the one who had triggered something in him. Perhaps he had felt remorse, a twisted sense of attachment, and could not bring himself to bury her with the others. Perhaps he had kept her longer than the rest, weeks instead of days, and in that time something had shifted in his broken mind. Or perhaps, the most disturbing theory, Pritchard had convinced himself that Emma was special, and that she was different. That by burying her separately, by marking her grave, he was showing her a twisted form of respect. The truth died with Leonard Pritchard in 2003. Whatever motivated him, whatever dark impulses drove him to abduct and murder 8 innocent children, would never fully be understood. But Emma was home, and so were the others. Funerals were held throughout the summer of 2024. Emma's was the largest, attended by hundreds of people from Hollow Ridge and beyond. Her casket, white and small, was carried by men who had been children themselves when she disappeared. Linda and Robert Hartman stood at the graveside, their faces carved with grief, as their daughter was finally laid to rest in the town cemetery, beneath a maple tree that had been a sapling when Emma was born. The headstone was simple: Emma Leigh Hartman. April 8, 1974 to July 23, 1985. Forever our angel. In the months that followed, the other families buried their daughters. Katie Ann Marsh, Jennifer Louise Tompkins, Amanda Grace Foster, Melissa Dawn Keller, Valerie Sue Brennan, Natalie Rose Hudson, Olivia Claire Bennett. 7 girls stolen from 7 families, finally coming home after decades in the dark. The media coverage eventually faded. The reporters moved on to other stories. But in the towns where these girls had lived, where their absence had left scars that would never fully heal, life continued with the weight of what had been learned. Betty's stand, long since torn down, was commemorated with a small memorial park, a stone bench, a plaque with 8 names. Parents brought their children there, told them the story, warned them to be careful, to stay close, to never talk to strangers. But the most haunting question remained unanswered. If Leonard Pritchard had not been caught, if he had not died of a heart attack in 2003, how many more girls would there have been? How many more families would have been destroyed? The FBI continued to investigate. They cross-referenced Pritchard's travel records with unsolved disappearances across the country. They found 3 more cases in North Carolina, Maryland, and Indiana, where young girls had vanished in the 80s under similar circumstances. White panel vans reported nearby. No witnesses. No leads. No leads. Those cases remained open. The girls still missing. In October 2024, Monica Reeves, the analyst who had first connected the cases, sat in her office late at night, looking at photographs of the victims. 8 faces frozen in time. Children who would never grow up, never graduate, never marry, never have children of their own. She thought about Emma, about that 60-second window when she had walked past the hardware store and vanished. About how fragile life was. About how easily everything could change. And she thought about the families who had waited 39 years for answers, who had never stopped hoping, even when hope seemed impossible. Monica closed the file and turned off her desk lamp. Tomorrow, she would start working on another cold case. There were thousands of them, stacked in file cabinets and stored in databases, each one representing a life interrupted, a family shattered. But tonight she allowed herself a moment. As a moment to acknowledge that 8 girls had been found, and that 8 families finally had closure, and that justice, however delayed, however incomplete, had been served. Outside her window, the city lights of Pittsburgh glimmered against the night sky. Somewhere out there, other families were waiting. Other children were missing. Other cases remained unsolved. But Emma Leigh Hartman was home, and in Hollow Ridge, Pennsylvania, where the Appalachian foothills roll like green waves against a pale sky, parents still hold their children a little tighter, still warn them about strangers. Still remember the summer of 1985, when innocence died on a hot Tuesday afternoon, in the space of 60 seconds, at an ice cream stand that no longer exists. Emma's story became a cautionary tale, told and retold, passed down through generations. A reminder that evil exists, that it can wear a friendly face, and that it can strike in broad daylight, in a place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. The yellow dress Emma wore that day, the one her mother had made for her birthday, was never recovered. Neither was the ice cream cone she had been holding when Jesse Dalton last saw her. Those details, small and mundane, became symbols of everything that was lost that day. In 2025, on the 40th anniversary of Emma's disappearance, Hollow Ridge held a vigil. Candles were lit. Names were read. Linda Hartman, now 74 and walking with a cane, stood before the crowd and spoke. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "for never forgetting. For never letting Emma become just another statistic. For helping us bring her home." That Robert stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. But he did not speak. He did not need to. The grief was written across his face, permanent and unchanging. When the vigil ended and the candles were extinguished, people dispersed slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving meant abandoning the memory of those 8 girls. But eventually the park emptied. The night grew quiet, and Hollow Ridge, like it always did, carried on. But the questions lingered. They always would. How does a man like Leonard Pritchard operate for 5 years without being caught? How does he abduct 8 children from 8 different towns without anyone noticing the pattern? The answer, uncomfortable and undeniable, is that he was unremarkable. He blended in. He moved frequently. He worked alone. And in an era before centralized databases, before instant communication, before the internet connected every police department in the country, it was possible, just barely possible, for someone like him to slip through the cracks. But not anymore. The Emma Hartman case changed things. It led to reforms in how missing children cases are handled, how information is shared across jurisdictions, how cold cases are reviewed and reopened. It became a teaching case at the FBI Academy, studied by new agents learning to recognize patterns, to think across time and distance, to never dismiss a lead as insignificant. And Emma herself became something more than a victim. She became a symbol, a face, a reminder that behind every cold case file, behind every missing person poster, there is a real child, a real family, real grief that does not diminish with time. The investigation officially closed in December 2024. All 8 cases were marked as solved. Leonard Ray Pritchard was posthumously charged with 8 counts of kidnapping and murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The graves, the personal items, the DNA, the pattern of behavior. But closure, the families learned, is not the same as peace. Linda Hartman still sits in Emma's room sometimes, holding that stuffed rabbit that was returned to her by the FBI, now sealed in a plastic evidence bag. She still wonders what Emma's life would have been like. Would she have become a teacher, like she always said she wanted to be? Would she have gotten married? Had children of her own? Robert tends Emma's grave every week, clearing away leaves, placing fresh flowers, talking to her as if she can hear him. Maybe she can. Maybe in some way neither of them understand. Emma knows she is home, that she is remembered, that she was loved. And in towns across Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia, other families do the same. They visit graves. They light candles, and they remember, because that is all they can do. Remember. The story of Emma Leigh Hartman, the girl who vanished from the ice cream stand in 1985, will be told for generations. It will be a story of loss and grief, of evil and injustice, but also of persistence and determination, of investigators who refuse to give up, of families who never stop loving their missing daughters. And it will be a warning. A reminder that monsters are real, that they walk among us, that they can strike anywhere, anytime in the space of 60 seconds. But it will also be a testament to the power of hope. Because for 39 years, Linda and Robert Hartman hoped. They never gave up. They never stopped searching. And in the end, their daughter came home. Not the way they wanted. Not alive and whole and grown. But home. Egdolm. And sometimes, in a world as dark and unpredictable as ours, that has to be enough.